Hi, welcome back to APLCrafts Lazy Dye Studio. Today we are dyeing up 4 skeins of 8515 Superwash Merino 15% Donegal Nep. And if you're new to tweed yarn, neps are the little things that make the yarn tweed, and that's Donegal. So in this episode we are going to be dyeing up those 4 skeins of DK weight in black, and then we're going to do a part 2 where we're going to overdye that black in a mixture of blue lilac, sapphire blue lilac, and some leftover dye stock from December. We're going a little bit back there, in the rum raisin colorway that I dyed up back then. So let's get started. Materials that we're using today are dedicated dye pot, measuring spoons, a spoon for moving your yarn around, gloves, paper towel, our old dye stock that we're going to use for part 2, sapphire blue, that's going to be used in part 2, oops, lilac, and in part 1 we're using true black, N95 mask, measuring cup for measuring out water, citric acid, and an additional paper towel. Yarn is soaking for at least a half an hour. I think I've got mine at almost an hour right now. You can soak it for longer if you want, but you want to soak it for at least a minimum of 30 minutes in tepid water. Sometimes you can put tablespoon of citric acid in the water if you'd like, but we're not doing that today. Okay, so in my dye pot I have 20 cups of water. We're going to add a teaspoon of true black, and then we're going to put in 4 skeins of DK weight yarn. I'm going to put on my mask and gloves and then put this in the water. Going to give this a little swish to make sure all those little dry bits are taken up with the water. I have my heat on medium-high just to get the water started. All right, and now we're going to add the yarn. Okay, we're going to do this all at once and just dunk it right in. Use your spoon to get the rest of that yarn in. This will come out looking like a tonal, which you actually want, because when we do the overdye, you'll start to see spots of the color that we're going to overdye, which will be that rum raisin with the sapphire and the lilac in part 2. I also forgot to mention, you can use safety ties. I like to use scrap yarn. You want to just put at least 2 around your hanks like this, so that when you're moving your yarn around, you're not getting your yarn tangled. Because if you just throw in a hank of yarn and just start swishing around, your strands are going to go everywhere, and it'll be a nightmare to deal with later. So to minimize that, scrap yarn or a safety tie just in between your yarn like this, and that'll help that a lot. Because whatever they have on this yarn, like see this, the yarn came like this, that's not enough. This will actually snap, and if it doesn't snap, it's still not big enough, and your yarn's going to get tangled up in that. So you want to have like an additional safety, pretty much, with a safety tie or scrap yarn. So we're going to move this around so that all of the yarn gets coated in that dye. With black dye, a little goes a long way, so we may or may not need an additional mini skein to soak up the rest of that black dye. we're going to see, because I have not added a citric yet. The citric will definitely help that yarn soak up that dye, but I want to get a lot of depth into this yarn, so I'm going to let it heat up and see if we can soak up as much of that black dye as possible. And then halfway through the process, we will add, we'll start at a tablespoon of citric acid and then go from there. So I'm gonna go get that mini skein of yarn ready just in case we need it, because we don't know. So I've got the heat going in this pot, and we're gonna let this heat up for a good 15 minutes at least, and then check it. It's been 15 minutes. You can see some bubblies going on here. We are going to add a tablespoon of citric acid and then see how much of that dye gets soaked up into the yarn. So as I add this citric acid, we're going to move some of this yarn around because I don't want to put the acid onto the yarn. It's not going to hurt it, but I'd rather it go into the water and then soak its way into the yarn than me putting it on the yarn. I'm going to leave the heat on just a little bit longer. So, as soon as I get all of the citric acid in here, we're going to move the yarn around properly by rearranging where it's at. Okay. Alrighty, let's find those strings and move this around. Ooh. Oh, okay, you're pulling. Why are you pulling? There we go. Okay, we may need to add a little bit more citric. I want to give this a minute and see. I have a feeling we're going to have to add another tablespoon. It is getting lighter. The water's getting lighter, but it's still too dark. So you can kind of see that we've got this charcoal gray going on. So it is soaking it up, but we may need to help it along with another tablespoon of citric acid. So we'll give this a minute and see what it looks like. Yeah. All right. We're going to add another tablespoon of citric acid. Same thing, we're just going to move the yarn to the side and get that citric acid in the water. Oh yeah, it's clearing up. Sweet. Oh, you see that? I love citric acid. It's so beautiful. Beautiful. It's like magic. Alright. So what we're going to do now, since this is pretty much cleared up and I suspect that it'll be crystal clear in a minute or two, I'm going to shut off the heat and let this heat set. So it'll probably take about a half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes to cool off, so that we can start part 2, which will be doing the overdye. So go ahead and do that now, and I will see you when this yarn is ready to get out of the pot. Now that we've taken the yarn out and put it in the sink, I'm going to let that cool off a little bit. We're going to get the overdye ready. So this is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for the beginning of part 2. If you're still here, this is part 2 of overdying black yarn, dyeing black yarn, and then overdying black yarn. So in this part of the video, we are going to take some old dye stock from December, rum raisin colorway to be exact, and we're going to put that in a pot. The water is cleared, as you can see here. And then we're going to play around with some color. We're going to add some sapphire blue and lilac. Lilac likes to break blue, so that's why I'm picking lilac over deep purple or any other purples. Although all the purples from Dharma do have, most of the purples from Dharma have a blue base in there, but the lilac is definitely leans blue, so that's why I chose that color. So I've got my 4 skeins of DK sitting in the sink. We're going to prep the dye water for this round. I'm going to add citric from the start because I don't want to deal with it later, basically, because this is APLCrafts Lazy Dye Studio and that's how we roll. So let's get started. I'm going to put on my mask and my gloves so that I can work with the dye, so I'm going to sound a little bit muffled. This water is still warm, but it's not really warm enough for dyeing, so I'm going to put the heat back on to medium-high. I'm going to do a tablespoon of citric acid. We're going to add our dye stock. I'm going to throw just a little bit of water in here just to empty out this residue. Just a smidge. See that? All right. Now, the fun part. Let's start off with the lilac. Ooh, that's blowing out. Let's do a 1/4 teaspoon of lilac. Then let's do a 1/4 teaspoon of sapphire. We're going to give this a stir. I don't know what this color is going to look like, so we'll see. Oh, ooh, that's pretty. It's showing up pretty exact on the camera too. It's this nice indigo, violety color. That's pretty. I like that. I think that will go well. All right. Let's add our yarn. We're just going to dump this in. And then press the yarn into the dye. Now, because this yarn is still wet, I don't know how much it's going to soak up. This is just an experimentation. So we may or may not still need that extra skein of yarn that I talked about earlier. But we'll see how this works first, because we may not need it or we may need it. But it's good to have it and not need it. You know how that saying goes. All right, let's start moving this around and rearranging just so we can get more of that yarn soaking up color. Oof, okay, that's not a good strand. Let's try a different one. The fun part is always trying to find those strands. The scrap yarn. And you can see that color is lightening up. And it took all of that blue first, and now we've got the purple left over, so that'll be interesting. You're not going to see this color unless it's in a specific type of light. It's more of a overtone, undertone than anything else, because the black is going to be the first thing that you see, and then when you look closer at the color, then you'll start seeing some of that blue and that purple, and you go, oh, that's interesting. You know, that's the effect that we're going for. Okay, let's see. Oh, that purple's getting lighter. That's good. We may have to add some more citric, but I want to give that a minute just to see. And I'm going to leave this yarn alone so I'm not tangling it and felting it, because we don't want that. So I'm going to give this a couple of minutes and see what this color looks like, and if we need to add some more citric acid or not. Did the water clear? Ooh, it's clearing. That's good. I'm going to add some citric anyway, but just a little bit. So let's do a teaspoon. Okay, we'll do a teaspoon, and we're going to move the yarn around like we do. Get that citric in there so it's not hitting the yarn. No, I really don't think we even need that, but I'm going to put it in anyway, because it's definitely clearing, which is nice. That means that this dye has set, because there's a lot of dye in here. This is very saturated. Sometimes with saturated, super saturated yarn, it's harder to get it to set without bleeding. You really got to play around with it. So this is nice to see. All right. So I'm going to let this heat up for like another 10 minutes and then shut off the heat so it's nice and hot, and then it can officially heat set. It'll be good to go. Let it cool down, and then we'll rinse it and hang it to dry. Okay, so this yarn is cooled off. Got soap on it, and it's just been sitting here. And now we're going to rinse. So when you rinse, you want to make sure that your yarn, your water, not your yarn, is not cold, not hot. I like to say baby bath temperature, but if you don't know what that is, just you want to make sure that when you put it, the water on your, when it hits your wrist, it's not burning. It's kind of like a little warmer than lukewarm. That would be a good temperature to use to rinse your yarn. And if you look at any of my previous videos, I've already talked about the reason why I rinse my yarn the way I do, although I have tried a couple other methods, but this is my favorite one. So we're going to go ahead and rinse the yarn. No bleeding, that's awesome, especially since this yarn is so saturated. So I'm just squeezing out all the excess water, And then what you can do after this is you can hang it in your shower. You can find one of those portable clothes dry hanger things. I don't know what they're called. I'll put a picture up. You can put on one of those. I like to make sure that they're hanging in the shower though for a little while, because this excess water that you just wrung out, there's still more in the yarn, and gravity will pull a lot of that liquid out and it'll just start dripping, so you want to squeeze more of it out. Once you've done that, you can roll it up in a towel and then just step on the towel and squeeze it out that way. So you can do that, and then you can hang it in the shade. I wouldn't hang out in the sun because you don't want to accidentally bleach any of your color off, because the sun will do that. And that's it. So we will look at the final product in a second. The goal with this yarn was to get a black base with just a slight hint of a bluish purple, and it doesn't look like it by itself that it achieved that until I realized after this dye session that I had forgotten to overdye 2 skeins of yarn that I had dyed black several months ago that I was going to overdye with this session. So I'm going to pull that over here, and then you can hopefully see the difference. So here's 2 skeins. I'm going to undo one of them. I may have to undo both of them, but let's see. It's so subtle, and yet you can tell that there's definitely a blue-purple tinge to it. Let's see if I can fix this. Okay. If you look closely, these 2 skeins right here look lighter than these here. It's so subtle, and yet a keen eye you can see where there's like a hue of color here where it's not here. So my experiment did work, which I'm very excited about. So now I have to take these 2 skeins that I forgot about and see if I can replicate that overdye for this. Now I don't have the rum raisin, so it's going to look a little bit different than this. But considering how subtle it is, because it is hard to tell unless you're in the right light, which is what I was going for, I should be close enough to get this color down here as opposed to just the black cat that's up here, because that was the color that I did, was black cat on the tweed up here. So that's awesome. It was a happy accident. I'm glad that that happened, because I really got to see where the difference was, because when I was laying out these skeins to dry, I was like, oh, the color didn't take, but it did take. So I'm happy about that. So let's see what these look like skeined up. And there you have it. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and overdye those other 2 skeins, and then I should have enough for my cardigan project, which is what this dye session was for. Anything that is left over of this dye session will be going into the shop, so just be on the lookout for that one, so you'll see what's going on with that. I'm always adding things, and things are going away, and I'm trying to color coordinate for 2 seasons ahead, so just keep an eye out in the Etsy shop and see what's going on in there. And thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this and learned something, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.